Darren Mitchell didn't think he jumped. 1 second, he was holding his daughter's tiny hand, walking her home from school along the Riverwalk, and the next, he let go and dove headfirst into the cold, dark water after a woman who'd just fallen in. "Daddy," Eden screamed from the edge, her 7-year-old voice cracking in terror. "I'm okay, baby," Darren shouted as he fought against the rushing current, eyes locked on the woman's unmoving shape being dragged downstream. She wasn't flailing, she wasn't screaming, she was sinking. He reached her in seconds, grabbing her under the arms and kicking with everything he had. The water was freezing, but he didn't care. He could barely make out her features under her soaked hair, but she was young, pale, and unconscious. He pushed her up toward the surface, coughing and gasping as he dragged her to the edge, where a jogger helped pull them both out. The woman coughed violently, then stilled. "She's breathing," Darren said hoarsely, brushing her wet hair from her face. Her lips were blue, but her chest was rising and falling. Relief poured through him like a wave. The crowd that had gathered started to clap, but Darren ignored them. "Eden," he shouted, heart racing until he saw his daughter run into his arms, crying. "You're soaked," she whimpered. "I'm fine, you're okay, right?" He crouched down, hugging her tightly while shivering in his wet clothes. The ambulance arrived minutes later, sirens wailing. Paramedics surrounded the woman, loading her onto a stretcher. One of them turned to Darren. "You saved her life. Did you know her?" "No, just saw her fall." The woman's eyes fluttered open as they started to wheel her off. She clutched Darren's arm weakly. Her voice was barely audible. "You jumped in for me." He nodded, water dripping from his eyelashes. "Yeah, I wasn't gonna let you drown." She stared at him like she didn't understand how that was possible. "Thank you," she whispered before her eyes closed again. Darren didn't see her again for 2 days. It was pouring when he got the knock on the door. He opened it to find a tall man in a suit standing on his porch, holding a black umbrella. Behind him was a sleek black car Darren had only seen in magazines. "Are you Darren Mitchell?" He frowned. "Yes, why?" The man handed him a crisp envelope. "Miss Hartley Ashford would like to see you. She asked me to drive you to her residence." Darren glanced down at the envelope, and then at Eden, who peeked from behind his leg in her pajamas. "Who?" "The woman you pulled from the river." He blinked. "She sent a driver." "Yes, sir, she insists." Darren hesitated, glancing at his daughter. "She can come," the driver added quickly. "We have a car seat in the back." That made him pause. "Wait, how did you even find me?" "She made sure we did." 20 minutes later, they pulled into a private estate outside the city, and Darren forgot how to breathe. The driveway was lined with fountains. The house was a modern mansion of glass and stone, and the front doors opened before they even reached them. The woman from the river Hartley stood there, her delicate frame wrapped in a silk robe. Her long brown hair was freshly styled, her skin glowing under the soft lights of the entryway. "Darren," she said, smiling like she'd waited years to see him again. He stared at her. "You're okay." "Thanks to you." Eden tugged his hand. "Daddy, is this a castle?" Hartley knelt down. "Hi there, you must be Eden. I'm Hartley. Would you like some hot chocolate?" Eden looked up at Darren. He nodded, and she followed a housekeeper inside. "Come in," Hartley said softly. He stepped inside, dripping onto her marble floors. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "Shouldn't be this way too." "You saved my life," she interrupted. "This is nothing." She led him to a sitting room with a fireplace the size of his old bedroom. The windows overlooked the hills. Everything was quiet, elegant, warm. "You really didn't have to do this," Darren said, rubbing the back of his neck. She sat down across from him, her eyes never leaving his. I did. I wanted to thank you properly. You didn't even hesitate. You just jumped in. His voice was rough. You were drowning. I know, she whispered, but people don't usually do that, not for strangers. He shifted in his seat, uncomfortable with praise. I'm just glad you're okay. I'm more than okay, she hesitated. I don't usually tell people this, but I'm Hartley Ashford. My family owns Ashford International. He blinked. She smiled gently. I'm a billionaire. Darren stared at her like she'd said she was from Mars. I guess that explains the car. She laughed softly, and the house and the driver. I thought billionaires had bodyguards and yachts and, I don't know, aloof personalities. Well, I do have a yacht, she admitted, eyes twinkling, but I don't like aloof. He shook his head, still stunned. Why were you at the river? Her smile faded. I needed air. I just walked out of a board meeting. They were trying to push me into a deal I didn't believe in. I couldn't breathe. I didn't mean to fall. I just leaned over the edge and slipped. You could have died. I know, she said quietly, but you were there. They sat in silence for a moment before she said, I want to help you. He frowned. What? You're a single dad. You work 2 jobs. Your shoes are still wet. I don't need charity. It's not charity, it's gratitude. Let me take you and eat an out dinner somewhere nice. Darren looked at her, unsure if this was real. Like a date. Hartley tilted her head. If you want it to be. He stared at her, this beautiful, powerful woman who looked at him like he mattered. Okay, he said, but I'm paying next time. Her laughter filled the room. Deal. The valet didn't even blink when Darren stepped out of the car in a wrinkled button-down and jeans that had seen better days. He handed over the keys like Darren belonged there, like every man who walked into this gleaming rooftop restaurant, overlooking the skyline, had calloused hands and worn-out sneakers. Hartley was already waiting at a table wrapped in gold-tinted glass, her legs crossed, hair swept back in an understated twist. The city lights glittered behind her, but Darren only saw her. You came, she said with a brightness that didn't match the restaurant's hushed elegance. I said I would, he replied, pulling out a chair. A waiter appeared without being summoned and poured sparkling water into tall glasses. Do they just know when someone's thirsty here? Darren asked. Hartley leaned in. The staff memorizes your preferences after one visit. Some of them know mine better than I do. You come here a lot. Not lately, she said, studying him. I'd forgotten how lonely this place feels when you're not with someone who sees the world the way you do. Darren looked around. Every table was a portrait-perfect posture, perfect smiles, perfect silence. I'm not sure I belong in a place like this. You're wrong, she said simply. He didn't answer. Instead, he watched her fillet the edge of her salmon with practiced ease and wondered how someone so composed could have once been dragging underwater, lifeless. How's Eden? She asked. She's with my neighbor tonight. Woman owes me a few favors, he added, seeing the question in her eyes. I've watched her kids more times than I can count. Hartley nodded. I'd like to meet her again, properly. She's not used to people like you. I'm not sure I am either, Hartley said, setting down her fork. I was raised with everything except normalcy. Dinner parties with investors, tutors instead of friends. I used to think had to earn affection by being useful. Sounds exhausting. It is. He tilted his head. So why invite me here? I needed to know if what I felt was real, she said plainly. When you pulled me out of that river, everything I thought I understood about people, about men, shifted. You didn't ask what I had to offer. You didn't hesitate. That's rare. Darren leaned back, folding his arms. You think jumping in the water makes me good. I think it makes you different. He stared at her for a moment. You know, I'm not rich. I fix busted elevators in apartment buildings that shouldn't still be standing. I buy groceries with coupons. My idea of a splurge is adding guacamole. Her eyes didn't waver. I know. And all this, he gestured around, this isn't my world. It doesn't have to be your world for us to share parts of it. Before he could respond, a man in a dark suit approached their table. He didn't look like a waiter. His smile was thin and calculated. Hartley, he said coolly, didn't expect to see you back here so soon. Dorian, she said, her posture stiffening just slightly. This is Darren. Dorian's eyes swept over him. Friend of the family. No, Hartley said. He's the man who saved my life. Dorian's smile faltered. Of course, that little incident at the river. Darren stood up slowly. You think falling into freezing water is little. Dorian raised a brow, didn't mean anything by it. Hartley's voice was calm but sharp. Then you can leave. Dorian's mouth tightened, but he nodded and walked off. Who was that? Darren asked once he was gone. Someone who likes to remind me I'm replaceable. In what way? He's on the board, my father's old partner. He's been circling my chair ever since the accident. Darren frowned. He wants your job. He wants control, she said, but I'm not giving it to him. Darren watched her closely now. Every inch of her looked polished, but there was a steel edge beneath it. She wasn't just surviving in this world, she was fighting for her place in it. You always this stubborn. Only when it counts. He nodded, a slow smile pushing through. Good. She blinked. You like stubborn. I do when it means someone doesn't quit just because it's easier. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension between them shifted, no longer cautious, but charged. I don't usually do this, she said finally. Dinner with strange men. Handing them pieces of my life. Darren leaned forward. Should I be worried? Not yet. They left the restaurant just after 10. The city had cooled, and the wind lifted her hair as they stepped onto the private rooftop terrace on the building's edge. It was quiet here, the noise of traffic muffled beneath them. Hartley looked up at the night sky. I used to come here just to feel small again. He joined her at the railing. Why would you want that? Because when you grow up with everything, you forget what it's like to want. And now. She looked at him directly. Now I want things I don't understand. He didn't move. I want something real, she said. His voice was low. And you think I'm real. You don't pretend. I don't have time to. She took a step closer, barely a breath between them. Can I ask you something? He said. Anything. Why me? She didn't hesitate. Because you didn't look at me like I was glass. Darren didn't kiss her. Not yet. But he touched her hand, and her fingers curled around his like she'd been waiting for that moment all night. Below them, the city moved on, but up there, it felt like time had stopped. The next time Darren saw Hartley, she was barefoot on the grass, dragging canvas tarps across the grounds of a city-funded community garden project. It was Saturday morning, and Eden had begged to tag along after Hartley invited them both to volunteer. The sun was bright, the air sharp with the scent of soil and spring leaves, and Darren had no idea how someone who wore tailored dresses to dinner could haul compost like she was born to it. You're early, she called out, brushing dirt off her cheek with the back of her hand. I thought you might bail. I said I'd be here, he replied, helping Eden out of the truck. Besides, you promised my kid there'd be strawberries. Hartley crouched beside Eden, who held a tiny spade like it was a sword. We're planting them today. You get to pick your row. Can I plant a whole army of them? Eden asked, eyes wide. Hartley grinned, you better. While Eden joined a group of kids near the greenhouse, Darren followed Hartley toward a patch of overgrown weeds. She handed him a pair of gloves and a rake. Didn't figure you for the gardening type, he said, eyeing her rolled-up sleeves and dirt-streaked arms. I'm not, but this garden's been underfunded for years. I made a donation last fall. They asked if I wanted to sponsor the expansion. I said I'd rather help build it. He nodded. So, this is what billionaires do on weekends. Only the weird ones. They worked in silence for a while, pulling weeds and leveling soil. Birds chirped from the trees overhead, and the wind carried the sound of children's laughter from the far end of the lot. Dorian came by my office yesterday, Hartley said after a while, her voice low. Darren paused, leaning on the rake. What'd he want? He offered to buy out my shares. His jaw tightened. You thinking about it? She shook her head. No, but he's escalating. He's been whispering to the board, trying to convince them I'm emotionally unstable after the river. Because you slipped. Because I walked out of a meeting and disappeared for the rest of the day. In their minds, that's reason enough to question my leadership. Darren's eyes narrowed. That's garbage. I know, but they're vultures. One sign of blood and they circle. He tossed a clump of weeds aside. You gonna let them? Hartley stood, brushing her hands. I'm not going anywhere, but I have to be careful. Then let me help. She looked at him, surprised. With what? Whatever you need. You've been looking out for Eden and me since the second dinner. Let me return the favor. A flicker of emotion crossed her face, something unspoken and vulnerable. She didn't answer right away. I don't know what this is yet, she said carefully. Us, you and me. I don't either, Darren said, but I know I'm not walking away from it. That night, after Eden was asleep in the guest room at Hartley's estate, her first sleepover in a house with a chandelier taller than her, the two of them sat in the music room, the only place in the mansion that felt untouched by wealth. No gold trim, no velvet, just books, a piano, and a room full of silence. Hartley sat at the keys, playing something soft and slow. Darren leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching her fingers move. It was the first time he'd seen her look unsure. I haven't played in years, she said. You're doing fine. She stopped. My mother used to play. She died when I was 13. Darren pushed off the door. What was she like? She used to sing while she cleaned. Badly, but she didn't care. She'd drag me into the kitchen and make me dance with her barefoot. He sat beside her on the bench. Sounds like Eden. She reminded me of her today, Hartley murmured. In the garden. They sat together for a long moment, the quiet stretching between them like a held breath. Why haven't you dated since Eden's mom? She asked suddenly. He hesitated. Because I made a promise to myself not to bring someone into her life unless I was sure. And now. He turned to her. Now I'm trying not to screw this up before I figure out what it is. Her eyes searched his. Do you want to kiss me? Yes. Then do it. He did. It wasn't tentative. It wasn't rushed. It was the kind of kiss that broke something open slow, anchored, real. Her hand found his jaw, steadying him as if she'd been waiting for this to happen, but afraid it never would. When they pulled back, neither of them moved. I've never let anyone in like this, Hartley whispered. Not since took over the company. You don't have to do this alone, Darren said. I don't know how not to. Then let me teach you. She rested her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her, grounding them both. Down the hall, Eden turned in her sleep. And for the first time in years, Darren felt like he'd stepped into something bigger than survival. something that might just be worth holding onto. The first time Darren saw Hartley lose control, it wasn't in a boardroom argument or a desperate moment, it was at her father's estate sale. She hadn't planned to go. The auction was being handled by a firm she'd hired long before she knew Darren. But when the catalog arrived and a photo of a cracked vinyl record player appeared on the final page, she'd gone silent. Then she'd picked up the phone. "I need to be there," she said. So they went. The estate was a cold, sprawling Georgian manor tucked behind tall gates and older trees. Darren had brought Eden along only because Hartley had insisted, but the moment they stepped inside, he felt the air shift. This wasn't a home. It was a museum of control, polished floors, untouched books, a fireplace that had never known warmth. The auction was already in motion. Rows of suited buyers raised numbered paddles while auctioneers rattled off listings in clipped voices. Hartley barely looked at the art or the rare furnishings. She walked straight past the crowd, down a hallway Darren hadn't noticed before, and into a small paneled room that smelled faintly of dust and lemon polish. "This was my mother's music room," she said, tracing the edge of a piano bench. "He never came in here unless it was to tell her to be quiet." Darren stepped beside her. "That the record player?" She nodded. It sat on a shelf, faded and cracked, held together with a strip of yellowed tape. "I was 8 when she taught me how to play her favorite vinyl. I'd sneak in after school, drop the needle, and just sit on the rug while she hummed along. After she died, he locked the room." Darren didn't ask why she hadn't taken it earlier. He understood. Sometimes grief stung worse when it caught up to you late. "Miss Ashford," a man in a navy blazer, appeared in the doorway. "They're moving to lot 78. She turned, her voice steady. "I'll take it now, quietly." The man hesitated, then nodded and left. When they got back to the main room, Eden tugged Darren's hand. "There's a lady with a green clipboard trying to talk to Hartley." Darren scanned the room. A woman with sharp eyes and expensive heels was weaving through the crowd toward them. "Hartley," Darren said quietly. "Someone's coming over, she looks official." Hartley's jaw tightened. "Eliza Morrow, Dorian's lawyer." The woman reached them with a bright, clipped tone. "Hartley, I didn't expect to see you here." "I could say the same," Hartley replied. "Dorian wanted me to deliver a message. He's filed an injunction to freeze your voting rights at the next board session. Claims you're acting in emotional conflict." Darren stepped forward. "You're kidding." Eliza didn't flinch. "It's just paperwork, nothing personal." Hartley's expression was unreadable. Everything's personal when it's about power. "I'm merely the courier," Eliza said, "but I'd advise you to prepare. The board will want answers." As she turned and walked away, Darren turned to Hartley. "You okay?" "I will be." "Do they have anything on you?" "No, but perception's enough." "What do you need?" "I need to remind them who I am." 2 days later, she did exactly that. The boardroom at Ashford International was a fortress of glass and steel, with a long table that looked more like a runway than a workspace. The board members sat in their usual formation, Dorian at the far end, his fingers steepled. Darren sat in the back, tie crooked, jacket borrowed, watching her walk into the center of the storm like she owned every breath in the room. Hartley didn't raise her voice. She didn't defend herself. She presented numbers: growth, expansion, stabilized partnerships. Then she laid a folder on the table. Inside is a proposal to acquire a sustainable logistics firm with a projected return of 28% year over year. It's been vetted, it's profitable, and it's my initiative. Dorian leaned forward. "This is a distraction." Hartley met his gaze. "It's a reminder." "And what of the incident by the river?" She didn't blink. "I slipped. I recovered, and I returned with vision. which is more than I can say for you. The silence that followed was thick and absolute. The chairman cleared his throat. We'll vote now. When the result was announced 8-3 in her favor, Dorian stood and left without a word. Outside, in the corridor, Darren pulled her into an alcove between two marble pillars. You didn't even flinch. I was shaking, she murmured, but I remembered something. What? That you said I didn't have to do it alone. He touched her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. You didn't. She leaned into him, her voice barely audible. I've never trusted anyone like this. You don't have to say it. I want to. She paused, the moment hanging between them. I love you. Darren didn't speak. He just kissed her fully, fiercely, like the words had been sitting in his chest all along. Later, at home, Eden ran into the living room holding a piece of paper. Look what Hartley gave me. Darren took it. It was a hand-drawn map of a small island surrounded by little sailboats and stars. A note was written across the top. For Eden, so you and your dad can visit whenever you want. He stared at the signature at the bottom, Hartley. Wait, he called as Hartley stepped into the doorway. Is this real? She smiled. There's a cottage, nothing fancy, but it's ours. Darren looked at her, every wall he'd ever built falling down all at once. You didn't have to. I wanted to. He crossed the room, pulled her close, and whispered, Then marry me. She blinked. What? I'm not good at speeches. I don't have a ring tonight, but I've never been more sure of anything. She laughed, teary and breathless. Yes. Eden jumped up and shouted, Wait, are we getting a new last name? Hartley knelt, arms open. Only if you want one. Eden hugged her so tightly, Hartley nearly lost her balance. Darren watched them, heart full in a way it had never been. A river had brought them together. But love, real, wild, earned love was what kept them there. The wedding was held under a canopy of olive trees on a private stretch of land overlooking the sea. Not one of the towering, headline-grabbing affairs expected from someone like Hartley Ashford. No press, no fireworks, no diamond-encrusted centerpieces, just her, Darren, Eden, and 50 people who actually mattered. Eden wore a flower crown she'd made herself out of wild lavender and white roses. She walked ahead of Hartley barefoot, determined to sprinkle every petal in her woven basket, even doubling back to fix a missed spot with theatrical seriousness. Darren watched her with quiet pride, his hands folded in front of him, his tie slightly askew as always. He wore a navy suit Hartley had picked for him, tailored but not flashy. She hadn't tried to change him for the day, just to frame him the way he deserved to be seen. Hartley's dress was unlike anything anyone had expected. No sequins, no train, no veil, just soft ivory silk that moved like water when she walked, and a thin gold chain around her neck with a single blue stone her mother's. It was the only thing she'd taken from the vault her father had left behind. As she reached Darren, she whispered, I still can't believe you're real. He took her hands, then leaned in and kissed her forehead. You're the only thing I don't question anymore. They didn't recite traditional vows. They'd written their own quiet, honest words spoken between occasional laughter and tears. Darren promised to keep showing up, even on the days he didn't have the answers. Hartley promised to never build walls he couldn't climb. And Eden, unprompted, stood between them and declared, You're both stuck with me now. Forever. After the ceremony, they ate under string lights as the sun dipped into the horizon. Instead of a formal dinner, guests helped themselves to long tables of Mediterranean food and passed bread baskets and chilled wine like family. When the music started, Darren didn't need to ask her to dance. Hartley pulled him up before he could make an excuse and wrapped her arms around his neck like she'd been doing it her whole life. You know, she said as they swayed, this feels like the first thing in my life I didn't have to fight for. He tilted his head. You sure about that? She smiled. Okay, maybe I fought a little, but it wasn't against you. No, he said softly. You were fighting to get to yourself. They danced until Eden fell asleep curled on a blanket beneath the stars. Her head resting on a stuffed giraffe she'd refused to leave at home. Darren carried her inside the stone cottage they'd begun renovating into their family retreat, tucking her in gently while Hartley folded her shoes and dress beside the bed. When they stepped back out into the night, the last of the guests had left, and the sea was whispering below the cliffs. Hartley took Darren's hand and led him to the edge of the overlook. You ever imagine this? She asked. He shook his head. Not once. I didn't think this kind of life was even built for people like me. She leaned against him. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe we're building something new. I don't want anything that doesn't have you in it. You've got me, she said, all of me. They stood in silence for a while, watching the moonlight shimmer across the water. And then, without fanfare, he pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a ring she hadn't seen before, simple platinum, no stones, just engraved with a single word inside. Found. I didn't have this at the first wedding, he said, but I want you to have it now. Her throat tightened. You kept it all this time. I had it made 2 weeks after I met you. Took me that long to accept I wasn't dreaming. She slipped it onto her finger and kissed him like he was air and gravity, and every force she'd ever needed to keep her grounded. They returned to the cottage, where Eden stirred only briefly, mumbling something about strawberries and pirate ships before settling again. Months passed. Hartley stepped down as CEO and named a woman she'd mentored for years as her successor. She remained on the board but moved out of the city, choosing the rhythm of family over the rush of power. She built a foundation focused on mental health access for working parents and quietly funded programs in neighborhoods no one else was touching. Darren kept his repair business, but only took jobs he enjoyed. He taught Eden how to fix a broken faucet and cook spaghetti without burning the sauce. On weekends, the three of them hiked, planted vegetables, and hosted impromptu dinners for neighbors and friends who quickly became chosen family. They never tried to be perfect. Some mornings, the coffee was burnt, Eden forgot her homework, and someone left the laundry in the rain. But every night, without fail, Darren wrapped his arms around Hartley and pulled her close. You still glad I jumped in? He'd ask sometimes, teasing. And every time, without hesitation, she'd whisper back, you didn't just save me. You gave me everything I didn't know I needed. They didn't build a life made of glass or gold. They built something better. Real, rooted, unshakable. And for the first time in both their lives, it was exactly enough.